love your long distance challenges, from the riding the Land's End John O'Groats from the young age to obviously breaking the record of cycling around the world. So we just wanted to ask first, what originally inspired you for taking on these types of challenges?
When I was really young, the inspiration really came from just wanting to get off the farm. I was growing up in the foothills of the Highlands. I was homeschooled. Riding ponies, climbing hills, riding my bike was a good escape. I wasn't really watching much telly or watching the tour or being influenced by mates. It was just being a farm boy and seeing the bike as a way of exploring sort of the sheer wanderlust of it. Even the farm track was a mile long, so even getting out of the farm. So yeah, that's where it came from. Dundee to Oban across Scotland when I was 12. I think when I actually took on that first decent ride across Scotland, it wasn't just the ride, it was the raising money for charity, handing over a charity cheque to Princess Royal, getting my story in the paper. As a 12-year-old boy, that had quite an impact on me. And, I was struggling a little bit with the transition into school, being homeschooled. So having something that was mine, that I was good at, and, I'd got a bit of validation for, I think gave me the encouragement to go bigger. And a few years later, I soloed Land's End John O'Groats, and I mean, little did I know at that time that you could make a career out of it, and that's what I did professionally for 15 years. But it was small beginnings. It was just loving riding the bike, wanting to get out there and explore the world, and it eventually took me to 130 nations and territories. Filming for the BBC and GCN all over the planet.
Nice. So being on the farm, you already originally had that bit of outdoor adventure anyway, and then the bike was sort of found a way to channel that into cycling.
Yeah. The three big things growing up was riding ponies, skiing, so I was right next to Glenshee, and riding my bike. And riding horses and ponies and skiing was never going to be a profession. But 2005, Ellen MacArthur broke the round the world sailing record. And I was pretty inspired by that. I was at university at the time. And I thought, wait, I want to do that, but on a bike. So 2 years later, I basically set out to do my version of Ellen MacArthur and filmed a BBC One documentary series, which, changed my life. Because if you imagine like Saturday evening, 7 o'clock, BBC One network television, I was 24 when I came back, 24 years old. And I was like on the Michael McIntyre slot Saturday evening. I went from pulling pints in the bar in Glasgow, being completely unknown, to, at that time in my life, sort of being stopped by everyone walking down the street. And for somebody who had never had any profile or professional career, suddenly having sort of that BBC One network type profile off the back of a doc changed my life. People were suddenly like, where are you going to go next? What are you going to do? Fully funded projects, book deals. Getting started is always the hardest thing. And I kind of feel like I'm lucky that my career started before social media and it was network television. These days, if you were trying to do something similar, you'd be trying to build a brand almost like an influencer, but building your own channel, but going straight onto network television. Yeah, it was unbelievable. It was personal interest to ride a bike and get out there and just explore the world. But I had no idea the power of media to then share that with others. And I get people coming up to me all the time now going, I remember seeing that documentary and I remember how it sort of gave me the confidence to go and do stuff. I was out riding with guys at the weekend who'd come up from Yorkshire. They were talking about watching those films, and I did it for my own selfish reasons because I wanted to get out there and ride my bike. But it's cool to see 20 years on how that also sharing the story influenced others, and it sort of became a thing.
Yeah. No, it's great. Chris, yourself?
Yeah, so coming from that, of all your big or small adventures, which one did you enjoy the most?
I think that my real happy place was doing unsupported but races. So something like the Africa Carrot to Cape Town World Record, where I'm still unsupported. You're still reliant on the friendship of strangers. You've still got to have like that proper expeditionary side of it, but you're trying to go fast. And 10,000 kilometers down the length of Africa for me was that perfect balance between sort of wild man adventure and racing. When you take it to something like the round the world record that still stands at 78 days. I mean, I loved it. I mean, as an athlete, it's the ultimate expression of everything I'd learned my entire life, but it's pretty one-dimensional. It's no longer about, you know, the people, the places, the cultures, where am I going to sleep tonight, where am I going to get my next meal. It's just like head down racing 16 hours a day. So incredibly proud of that. But if your question is like, which ones did you enjoy the most? I love the ones where I was pushing myself, but it still had that sort of expeditionary sort of element to it.
Cool.
Yeah, no, we can see with the challenge that we're looking to take on, there's people who've done similar ones over longer distance and say they can really soak that up, and people obviously then going huge for time, and it's interesting to see the different balance of soaking up, you know, local culture, enjoying the experience, and as you say, getting your head down and racing. So yeah, that's really interesting.
I think everyone's wired up differently, and if you were to say to me, just cycle around the world without any timeline, I think that might be, I mean, some people have done it amazingly successfully, you know, the Al Humphreys of this world. You know, you get to a T-junction and you flip a coin whether you go left or right. I think I'm not wired up that way. I don't think I'd be very good at it. I like having a timeline. I like having a sense of sort of momentum. So if there was constantly the choice to stop and just explore stuff, I just don't think I'd ever really get going. So I like the fact that, you know, I love the Americas, which was 9 months from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, where I got to stop, shoot stuff, you know, be a part of interesting stories as they happened. But I had a strict timeline. I needed to get between the two mountains, Aconcagua and Denali, within a single climbing season. So again, that was sort of like a really nice balance between not just head down and miss everything because you're going so damn fast, but equally there's sort of a timeline to keep to. Yeah,
I can definitely see that. Yeah, makes sense. With regards to people taking on such adventures, what's one of the main big things that you recommend for people while they're planning these?
I know it sounds blindingly obvious, but a lot of people spend their lives talking about stuff that never happens. So the biggest trick before you get all to the practicalities of the logistics and the planning is just the commitment. It's just like prioritizing your life so it happens. You know, you'll never regret a failed expedition, but you will regret never having the gumption to put yourself in a position to do stuff. So, you know, because of money, because of busy times, because of family, because of loads of reasons, like that human tendency to talk passionately about stuff that never really happens. So it sounds blindingly obvious, but commit to it, say it out loud, put it in the diary, you know, and once you own it, it goes from being something sort of quite sort of fun and fluffy and sort of abstract to real. And, you know, going on these adventures is part of our identity. You know, it's like becomes part of who we are. It's like memories that last a lifetime. Then you get down to all the practicalities of like, how do I fundraise for it? You know, who do I need to support this? Like, I can't do this on my own, so I need, you know, even if you're riding solo, you need the support of, you know, friends, family, sponsors, whoever to buy into the dream. So that communication bit, like, who cares? Why do they care? And are they on board with this? Because it's pretty obvious why you would want to go on a big adventure, but I think it's quite often quite an important task to sort of sit down and go, well, how do I sell this to my partner? Or how do I sell this to a sponsor? Or how do I sell this to... Why would they care? And really having that level of empathy, because, you know, these things are quite often a big commitment of time, and, you know, you're having to excuse yourself from other things in your life. So maybe this is not the answer that you expect, but I think most expeditions fail. Most expeditions and rides fail before they get to the start line, either because people fail to prioritize them or they don't resource them properly. You know, they don't get proper buy-in from the right people, so they end up sort of underfunded or getting distracted by other things in their lives. When it comes down to the actual nuts and bolts of how do I train, you know, how do I fuel, you know, all that stuff, that's all just practicalities. You know, which route do I take? There's loads of great resources out there to support with that. I mean, I've done a podcast series and a book called Endurance. That's a pretty good resource, free resource if you listen to the podcast. hearing from the world's best in terms of like how to. So if you're wondering about everything from, you know, female athlete health through to aerodynamics, through to bike fit, to, you know, there's one of a gazillion resources to get information from those who've done it before. But the hardest thing, commit to it, make it happen.
Coming on from the fitness aspect, you came from a farming background. I presume, or I can only assume, that you're an extremely fit individual anyway, before the challenge. But I want to know how you manage your training without burning out.
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of tricks. A lot of people get to the start of their big rides already tired. So, you know, you're nervous. You tend to sort of be burning the candle at both ends. So the temptation is you sort of start in a depleted state. A lot of big rides, you know, if you're going all the way to the other side of the planet, for example, you don't need to be like race fit as you would be for racing a crit or, you know, a single day race. It's more just being really healthy. So yeah, you need to be fit in terms of like, you know, basic strength, but a lot of the conditioning. So fitness is two things. It's clearly fitness in terms of sort of your muscular strength, but then it's also conditioning. And conditioning is being used to spending long hours doing what you do. So a lot of people are amazing on Zwift because they'll push out big numbers, they'll have a pretty impressive FTP, but tell them to sit on a bike for 10, 12 hours and they'll fail because their neck, their backsides, their hands, you know, hand numbing, whatever it is, or you go into ultra endurance and the first thing that fails is your digestion and your nutrition, your gut, as opposed to your legs. Having the basic sort of fitness to ride the bike, a lot of people can get, especially for the sort of basic zone 2 riding that you're doing for ultra endurance. But the conditioning to then be able to do that on repeat, wake up tired and get back on the bike, a lot of it's psychology, a lot of it is sort of having a wry smile and an ability to suffer, but a lot of it is just about, you know, proper pacing. You know, you don't need to find endurance, you don't need to push for it like you would in a training ride. You know, you really are riding the road in front of you, protecting yourself, always thinking about tomorrow, always thinking about, you know, how you think your way through the entire task. It always amazes me in these big, I've not done many races because I'm normally out there just doing expeditions myself, how and why people quit. And it's not normally because they can't ride their bike or they have a mechanical, it's because they choose to stop. They just stop riding the road in front of them. When I was racing GB Duro, which is the 2,000 kilometre gravel race the length of Britain, you know, 60 started and 13 finished. And I was left at the end going, well, why did 47 people stop riding? What was happening at that point where you get off your bike and say, well, I can't carry on? I think you can argue that they could always carry on. It was their choice to stop. Very few of them had injuries that they couldn't carry on from. So that really comes down to how you see yourself and your mental toolkit when you're in those moments to be able to keep going. You know, I always think about a performance mindset as opposed to just a positive mindset, because a performance mindset is just like what I think, what I do matters. When it's tough, it's allowed to be tough, really own it. You know, I think the way other people see high performance and ultra endurance is quite sort of heroic and happy, and it's not. Like, it's hard. I mean, there's a reason that not many people do this well, and really owning that when it's difficult and realizing that that's sort of the life affirming stuff when you're on the bike and figuring it out for yourself. You're not doing it for others. The only person you're racing is yourself. Is so important. Just being able to go into yourself, ride the road in front of you, own it. You know, even if it's hard, especially when it's hard. And that's very different to how do I do intervals to push up my FTP. You know, blah blah blah. So, and also knowing that when you go into ultra endurance, a lot of people, when they get tired on the bike, their form on the bike changes, and knowing how you change when you're tired. So I know my right knee comes out, I know my shoulders can come up, I can get quite A-framed, you're taking more shock through the upper body. So keeping that fluidity on the bike, making sure that you sort of ride as consistently as possible. And when you do start to get sore on the bike, knowing your body well enough that you know the difference between being sore and being injured. And obviously if there's something which is likely to injure you, you know, making the change, whatever that means. It could be saddle height or strapping on a limb or whatever it is, but being able to sort of nip it in the bud early enough. Whereas other times you're just sore as hell because you've been on the bike for 12 hours, and that's okay, because it's not something that's going to fail you. It's just something you need to learn to deal with on the ride. And I've been in lots of situations where I've, like take the Around the World in 80 Days, where I've, fractured my radial head, my elbow, and broke some teeth, but I could still ride. Whereas if, I'd broken a more important bone, or, something else had happened, but it's knowing how to deal with those things when they happen.
Yeah. Funny might come on to the next question, that, because it was with regards to all the trips that you've done, what are some of the unexpected issues that you've come across, and how have you dealt with them? So is that injury in particular, or is there other things that you've come across?
Yeah, I mean, there's always big unknowns on these trips. I mean, I guess I have to split them between the unsupported and the supported. When you're doing unsupported trips, there's unknowns every day, because you're always sort of problem solving. Go back to the length of Africa. You've got no idea where you're going to sleep that night or where your next meal is. So there's constant problem solving. People are often scared about sort of wildlife and wild places, but the worst stuff that's ever happened to me is human. The only time I've been run over and mugged and being under armed escorts and high security stuff, it's always because of people. Probably my worst day on the bike on the first time around the world was in Louisiana, when I was hit by a car, went over the bonnet, broke the windscreen, buckled the bike, and then I was mugged that evening. So, I mean, you can't account for that. I think I would do things differently now, knowing what I know, especially putting myself in a situation where I could be mugged that evening. But again, that's hindsight being 2020. And like with the endurance stuff, it's not necessarily what happens to you, but it's how you react in the situation. And I'm not suggesting I always get it right. Not so much on the bike, but the only times I've ever turned back expeditions is when I felt that we were risking too much. So there's some mountaineering expeditions, and I had a big failure ocean rowing when we capsized in the middle of the Atlantic. But the only time that I've actually sort of turned a team back or turned back an expedition is when I felt that we were risking too much. And that's an interesting conversation, because you're constantly thinking about exposure, being like, how likely are things to go wrong? And if they do go wrong, how serious are the consequences? Because there's always risks. So, adjusting where you're riding on the road, like whether you've got a follow vehicle or, whatever you're doing on the road in terms of your safety is a constant dialogue in terms of like, how likely are things to go wrong? And if they do go wrong, how serious are the consequences? If I was to crash here, how far am I from the nearest hospital? If I'm water rationing and I run out, how big is this desert? That sort of stuff. So even though nothing's wrong, you're aware of the consequences if something was to go south. And so that's a constant sort of dialogue with yourself, I guess, or your team when you're on these big rides. Because it's not just like going out from your house and riding around Scotland or England. This is, riding across mountains and deserts and, the world. And it's a very different equation when you're out in these parts trying to ride safely. And because it's not safe in the sense that, I think a lot of people would be intimidated by these places and landscapes, but it's absolutely fine as long as you are thinking outside of the actual, riding the bike, and you're thinking about, what do I need to know in this situation? What does the next 100, 200 miles look like? Have I thought through X, Y, and Z? Do I have contingencies? So stuff goes wrong when you're on expeditions, but that's always it's not like you go looking for danger or for things to go wrong, but it's the fact that every day is different and there's a huge amount of problem solving that makes these rides, a ton of fun.
Cool. Just a quick one with regards to the routes that you've taken. I see you with Cheddar Gorge behind you there, and with you speaking about growing up in Scotland. When we did Land's End John O'Groats, I said we need to do a little bit of a detour of Glencoe, because for me that's the best road in the UK, and absolutely probably my favourite day of cycling up Glencoe. Is there a specific road that sticks in your mind, or a day of cycling where you go, this was maybe my best day ever on a bike.
I think I would probably struggle to choose one road. I guess like you, I'm biased to actually the stuff I get to ride on my doorstep. You know, I had a group out on Saturday around East Lothian when the sun is shining and you're up in the Lammermuirs. I mean, there's nowhere better on planet Earth. You've got the place to yourself. It's stunning. There's some stuff in the UK. You don't need to cycle to the other side of the planet to find phenomenal riding. It's often about, you know, time with mates. And I mean, yes, of course, you know, northern Botswana with a giraffe cantering alongside me, you know, or elephants on the road, or I love deserts. You know, I've ridden across the Atacama Desert, the Outback, the Sahara, the Gobi, the Bellucci. I love desert riding, maybe because it's the opposite from what we get in the UK. And there's something about these expansive roads that go across, which are pretty special. The Alcan Highway is the road that links Alaska down through the Yukon to British Columbia. I've ridden that a couple of times. That's absolutely stunning. But basically a desert of trees, if that makes any sense, just bears and trees. So I do love these stretches where you've just got huge expanses to get across on the bike. They're pretty memorable. Riding across the Gobi Desert, you know, with the trains that are literally go from horizon to horizon down into northern China, that's pretty special. Yeah, I mean, I took on a daft project in lockdown to run every street in Edinburgh with my daughter. And I think it's often about who you're with. You know, some big solo rides are incredibly memorable, but also just doing some rides in Scotland with friends, or doing a daft project like that with my daughter. You know, I'll remember the place and the adventure so much better because I was with family or I was with a friend.
Definitely, it's funny you say that because we did a Three Peaks this weekend, didn't we, Chris? And it was and we've done the Three Peaks probably 40 times together. And we've had some quite less enjoyable weekends with the group, and this was one of the best weekends we've ever had, just because everybody got on. The people that were climbing the mountains were great. And yeah, I think that really helps having those people around you that make it special at times.
Yeah, it does. Sorry, Mark. Sorry, Rob. It does surprise me you say deserts are your favourite place, because some of the guys going through now across the world say deserts are the worst place because you're so secluded and stuff. And you say it's about being around people, but obviously you had a family back home on some of your long rides. I'm just wondering how you dealt with that, the battle with yourself. Across these long expanses.
Yeah, it's funny because I've been asked that before, and I don't really understand the question. I'm not an introverted guy. You know, I spend my life doing broadcast, and you know, I love the interaction with team and you know the cultural sort of aspect of these rides. But I've also spent weeks and weeks of my life not talking to anyone, and I like the desert. I mean, I've seen other riders saying that they really struggle with deserts in the space. And I'm often asked, do you get lonely and do you get bored? And I'm like, well, no. I mean, when you're here, you're constantly distracted by the next task that you need to do. And, you know, that can be quite lonely, you know, because it's slightly unfulfilling. Whereas when you're on the bike, you've got a few very simple things to do. Ride your bike, stay fueled, recover, and repeat. And it's all about momentum. And yes, your mind goes to very different places, but you've got time to think every thought and dig out memories, and like you've got space like you would never have in the rest of your life. And there's something incredibly special about that. So I've never been anywhere in terms of the deserts and the remote sections. The only time I've really been bored was rowing the Atlantic. The Atlantic's really boring. You know, if you want to go on a journey that's just about yourself, then row an Atlantic, row an ocean, because out there it's big waves, little waves. You know, and once you've lost sight of shore, and I've spoken to mariners that go, oh no, it's magical, it's wonderful, and that's great. We're all wired up differently. I found it very, very boring. Riding a bike is incredibly rewarding, because even the desert changes. Every day is different, and you earn that change by riding those miles. So there's always the excitement of what's around the corner. of what's over the horizon, of where you're striving to get to. So boredom through place, yeah, in terms of the oceans, that gets pretty samey after a month. But crossing mountains, crossing deserts, going through places where you're not speaking to people for a week or two, you're still, and I think this goes back to my previous point, I think if I was doing that completely nomadically without a timeline and a purpose, I think I would find that a bit hard to focus on. But give a narrative to yourself, create a focus, and I've always really enjoyed that. And also, I've seen people blogging about this, going, you know, I took myself to the middle of the desert and felt really sorry for myself and really sad. And I'm like, well, you've only got yourself to blame. You put yourself there. So, I mean, I find that really interesting. I mean, there's also a check your privilege. I mean, if you've got the opportunity to ride around the world or go on a big expedition, you've got nobody else to blame for that. And it is an absolute rare privilege to be able to get on our bikes, go to remote places, experience wildlife, all the rest of it. So, I find it difficult to go to that place and then have a gripe about it.
Yeah, it's where I find it interesting with you saying, you know, going into broadcasting so young and being able to work with the BBC in every way that took you, which is incredible. And me and Chris have had this conversation of nowadays in the social media space where everything's in the hook in the first 3 seconds of a video and how you get engagement in a very different way, of how much potentially some people add those dramas in for, you know, or clicks and views, which from your experience in the BBC way before then and without that sort of natural, lots of people doing in essence similar things, I guess that's why you maybe see that in a different way and didn't have to, you know, get involved in those worries.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's really interesting. So when it comes to storytelling from an adventure, my humble opinion is, I mean, when I was trained and all the BBC stuff I did, it was observational documentary. So you were out there, and obdoc by definition, you're observing, you're not scripting. So social media is scripting. You go into it knowing what you're going to film, how you're going to film it, you know, first 3 seconds, what's the hook, what's the caption, blah, blah, blah. Observational documentary is, you know, you ride into wherever, the cameras are rolling, and whatever happens, you film, and then you make sense of it afterwards. And you hope that you've captured the important elements, and then you cover the shots to make the story work. So you might need to get some reverses, some GVs, some landscapes, some establishing shots and all the rest of it. But once you know that you're living a story that's likely to be shown, you then need to make sure that it's properly covered, as opposed to, you know, on your phone doing a 60 or 90 seconds piece to camera and then that is the story. You know, that's not documentary making, that's just a piece to camera. And so, to your point, when you think about long form storytelling, you're out there living it authentically. You're doing whatever you would do anyway, and then you hope to capture the important elements. But the really important bit is people don't care about you. People don't care about you. And the issue with a lot of TikTok and social media is people get very tied up on their own interest. So whenever I go and do a talk, I'm flattered that people have bought tickets and want to come along. But what they're really interested in is the fact that I've created the opportunity to go on this stuff, and it's sheer wanderlust and escape. The first question they always ask when I chat to people is about something I've done. The second question they always ask is about themselves, because the reason that they care about me is because they care about themselves. It's human psychology, and the reason that whether they ever will do these adventures for themselves, the things that I do is a portal into a world which fascinates, inspires, and interests them. And so actually talking too much about myself kind of misses the point. I am just a vehicle for their interests. Now, they wouldn't hang out with me, if you like, if they didn't think that I was a likable, interesting person to hang out with. It's that in 5 seconds would I go for a pint in the pub with them. So you have to pass the sort of the likability test, otherwise you just won't watch them. But I think people get too hung up on their own ego and their own character. And I think when you're going on authentic journeys, like a real journey, not something created for social media, just live the journey and take people on that journey. And every time you switch the camera on, make sure that there's a reason that you're pointing the camera at stuff and it's not just to groan about how sore your backside is. Because people do care a little bit about your part of the journey, but what they're interested in is the fact that you're on this journey, and they're only interested in you because you're on that journey. And I think when you have that humility around storytelling, it stops everything just being this sort of psychological sort of, let me tell you how I feel about how I am. People can only take so much of that. And when authentic storytelling for me is when you go out, you ride your bike, and you say, let me take you on an adventure. And I'm filming this because this is interesting. Let me show you something. So you're just a vehicle for the story. You're not actually the story. And I think when you start to frame it that way, you then sort of cut through a lot of the nonsense you see on social media, where somebody's standing there in a beautiful camp spot in the middle of somewhere, and I'm like, show me it. Show me where you are. Tell me something interesting. But all they're doing is telling me about themselves and how they feel. And my patience for that is almost zero. Like, you can do a bit of that afterwards once I understand the journey you're on.
Yeah, that's really insightful. We are going to be sort of documenting our trip across the world, obviously. But yeah, it's interesting to hear your side of that. So
yeah, because I make a lot of the content stuff for us, and I find it's so easy to get roped into just pointing the camera at yourself, and you're not seeing any of the views on the free peaks and stuff like that. And yeah, it does make a lot of sense, but it is very easy to do and get roped.
It's very easy to do. Yeah. But I think the old adage, like, who cares? Why do they care? Who cares? Why do they care? And the reason you care is not the same reason as they care. So make sure you're taking people on a journey, and as part of that, tell them how you're feeling about it. But if the whole journey is how you're feeling about it, I don't care about the journey.
Yeah.
And so that's the bit that you've got to get first. Get people excited about the journey, and then tell them how you feel about it.
Yeah, you've almost got to make it their journey as well. Then,
yeah,
makes sense.
Absolutely.
Makes sense.
Come on a journey with me. Yeah.
Okay. We could make this the last question. So, what is next for Mark?
I've got a couple of things in Europe coming up. Right down to the Med, down over the Alps to Nice, and I'm hoping to do a film this summer out in Central Asia, Pamir Highway. So big gravel ride, just Tajikistan, so just north of Afghanistan.
Yeah,
that's in the planning at the moment. But yeah, I'm running as much as I'm riding these days. This next weekend, I'll be heading up to do a big fell running loop up in Perthshire. So. Yeah, mixing it up. Now that I'm not riding professionally, I'm not riding full time. I'm really enjoying doing lots of other stuff as well.
It's great. It's funny how we've gone through cycles. I ran a lot and then got on the bike, mainly probably at the start of COVID, just like so many people did. Started cycling more, and now I'm not running as much because just you can see so much more on the bike. But I'm guessing with the amount of miles and things you've seen, then you probably flip between the two of what you fancy doing more at the time.
Yeah, and when I was riding full time, you're fit for one thing, so your functional fitness is actually terrible. Your flexibility is terrible because you're just living on the bike. So it's quite nice these days to, I'm a big guy, so it's quite nice to go to the gym and not worry about putting on muscle mass, and to feel actually a bit healthier in many ways. I always joked I was properly like T-Rex, all legs and no arms. So it's nice to have some better functional fitness and be able to do stuff other than ride the bike. And also there was a couple of times towards the end of my career when you're trying to break the records, it's very hard to train for that final sort of 2-3% performance. So I can still go out and do any decent long ride, but you just can't do the numbers. And the last thing I did in anger was break the North Coast 500 record, and I had to hold 270 watts normalized power for 28 and a half hours. Unless you're training full time, you just can't do that. So, it's just the numbers drop off pretty fast if you're not doing it full time. So you can still go and do the adventure stuff. You can still go and ride a double century, but you're not going to be able to hold those watts.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, really enjoy your time, Mark. So thanks a lot for that. That's great and really insightful. And I've got a lot from it, and I bet you have as well, Chris.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Well, I want to wish you every success with the ride. It's an awesome adventure, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people, including myself, looking forward to following.